very happy Tuesday to y'all. How are we doing? Welcome to another Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me at all, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So I decided to make videos about it. If you like true crime and also want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. Oh man, I hope you all are ready for today's case. So, before we get into it, I did go ahead and break this case down into two parts. Now, I probably could have done it in one video and then it would have just been one of my longer videos, maybe like 2 hours or something. However, you may or may not know, those kind of videos, it takes me like anywhere from 5 to 6 hours just to film. Not just because, you know, I'm putting on my makeup and doing stuff and kind of referencing my notes here, but I've said this multiple times in other videos, I'm not in a soundproof location, I'm just in a shoebox apartment, thrown in the corner of my closet here to make these videos. So as such, noise does not get filtered out. I live on an extremely busy, thorough street. It's one of those streets where, like, if you live in town, you know those, like, suburban side streets that you can cut through across town? Those are kind of the streets that I live on. So I'm constantly having to stop what I'm saying in the middle of it, repeating myself because there are such large, loud vehicles in this neighborhood. I've lived in the city before, all right, guys? Like, I've lived in the actual city. I've never in my life lived in such a noisy, loud neighborhood before. It's pretty wild, and we're also in a very old house, so I'm sure that doesn't help either. So, as such, I have a lot to do today. I have a lot of other, like, life stuff to get to. So yeah, I just decided to break this case into two parts. And yeah, sorry about that. I just do not have time right now, you know? So, unfortunately, I just have a lot going on right now, including taking one of my cats to a vet appointment tomorrow. Just really busy, so I don't really have 5 or 6 hours to film a video. I have a few hours, so that is why I decided to break up this case today. Oh my god, that was a lot. That was a lot. So sorry, I really wanted to just dive right into this, but yeah, wanted to preface that for y'all. Today, we will be talking, I'm sure y'all have heard of this one, the mysterious disappearance of Crystal Rogers. Have y'all heard of this? You've heard of this case, right? It's one of the many high-profile cases out of Bardstown, Kentucky. Yeah, y'all, so get this, just in case you're out of the loop here. So Bardstown, Kentucky, it's a small town in Kentucky, and the population is like barely over 13,000. All right, that was the last Google check that I did last night, barely over 13,000. There are 5 high-profile, unsolved cases from that town. 4 are straight up murders, and 1 is, who we'll be talking about today, Crystal, who disappeared and is presumed dead. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So beginning in 2013, there was a murder of a police officer, Jason Ellis. Totally want to dive into these cases, by the way, later on. That was in 2013. And then the next year, in 2014, a special education teacher and her daughter were then killed in their own home. And then, as we'll get into, in 2015, we had the disappearance of Crystal. And then in 2016, there was another murder directly related to her case. We'll get all into it. Like I said, all of these cases, to this day, as I sit here speaking to you, filming this, are all unsolved. Pretty wild. And I think that's what blows a lot of people's minds. This is a population of barely over 13,000. That's a tiny freaking town. Now, if you were to say, right, like some big city like LA or something, like, oh yeah, there's like these 4 cases that happened, you know, one a year and they're unsolved, you'd be like, I mean, that's a city. There's a lot of people, statistics and all that. But what the F do you do with a small town with this many unsolved murders, you know? It's wild. And yeah, I just became totally engrossed in this case, in Crystal's case. So engrossed. And I kept digging and finding more and more information, because even though this case is unsolved, and even though there's so much relevant, pertinent information that has never been released to the public, there's still a lot of information out there about this case. So yeah, buckle up, and we're gonna get ready to talk about the mysterious disappearance of Crystal Rogers. And real quick, just wanted to give a shout out because someone in the comments actually alerted me to these cases going on in Bardstown. So thank you so much, Casey Gibbs, for popping up in the comments and letting me know about some of these bizarre cases out of Bardstown, Kentucky. And like I said, yeah, I think I definitely want to take the time and do a deep dive into the other cases out of Bardstown because, man, it really drew me, guys. Like, I watched documentaries on Crystal's case. I kept digging. Like, seriously, the sources for this case that I bookmarked and had, it has to be almost in the triple digits. I did so much research in this case because I couldn't get enough. Like, I just kept digging. And it also helps that Crystal's family has been very active and very vocal in trying to find her. So that also helps because the family has done lots of interviews. So I will have lots and lots of quotes of family members. I personally love getting quotes because I like, seeing and hearing these people in their own words. You know what I mean? All right, dear God, that was a lot. So let's go ahead and get into the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. And there will be a couple F-bombs with some quotes in here, just FYI. So, Crystal Marie Rogers was born April 4th, 1980 in Kentucky. Her parents were Tommy and Sherry Ballard, and she also had a brother and a sister. Her sister's name was Brooke, and her brother's name was Casey, and Crystal was the oldest. Now, for all the information that is out there about this case, there's not too many, personal details about Crystal. Again, I think it's because her family's focusing on finding her, right? But there's, little tiny details that I found out about her, such as that she has 3 tattoos. She had stars on her foot, feet prints on her back, and a tiger tattoo on her foot, or ankle. Now, Sherry, Crystal's mother, describes her daughter as very friendly and sweet. She was one of those people that was always able to make friends, but at the same time, she was very shy, very down to earth. Now, Sherry said her and her daughter were very, very close. They had a very special bond, and she felt very lucky to have Crystal as a daughter. Crystal ended up growing up, and she ended up having 5 children of her very own. She had 3 daughters and 2 sons. I know 2 of her daughters were named Tori and Kylie, and her 2 sons were named Trenton and Eli. Crystal's family said that she absolutely loved children, hence why she had 5, and she would often work multiple jobs if she had to in order to provide for them. She was a very good mother. Sherry said Crystal was also one of those mothers that wasn't too, overprotective like she herself was. Crystal was sort of kind of chill and laid back a little bit. Now, at some point, Crystal married a man named Keith Rogers. Unclear, because again, I don't have a whole lot of background personal details about her. Unclear if Keith was her second husband, first husband, don't know when they got married. I just know that Crystal at one point married a man named Keith Rogers, and they had children. Not sure how many or whatever, but that's part of the 5 children that Crystal had. And eventually, again, I don't know when, but eventually the couple separated. And they were legally separated, which I think is why when Crystal's case first hit the press, she was named as Crystal Rogers, even though she wasn't with Keith anymore, I think Rogers was still her legal last name. Now, after separating from Keith, Crystal began dating and eventually living with a local man named Brooks Houck, who was a real estate developer. She initially had rented a house from Brooks, and the two, eventually grew closer and became much more, and ended up being together and living together. The couple would end up having a son. That was Crystal's 5th child, her son Eli. They lived in the Creek Chase neighborhood in Bardstown, Kentucky, which is located in Nelson County, and they lived at their home with them and Crystal's 4 other children. And by the time that the events of today's case take place, Crystal and Brooks had been together approximately 3 years, almost 3 years. Now, we'll touch a little bit on Brooks here and his family. So yeah, Brooks Houck, he came from the Houck family, and that was a very local family in the area. They're very prominent and well-respected simply because they've been there a long time. They own a bunch of properties, so they're a bunch of landlords and being developers and stuff. Basically, your stereotypical big fish in a small pond kind of family. Big fish in a small pond kind of family. Brooks had even run for county sheriff in 2014, and there's actually an ad that he put out that has Crystal with baby Eli. Now, it said the Ballards, Crystal's family, opened their home up to Brooks, and they were just happy that Crystal seemed happy, you know? Apparently Brooks would come over and just have like hours-long conversations with Crystal's family. However, Sherry noted that, you know, even though he seemed to be, you know, a caring and loving father to Eli, according to Sherry, Brooks did not really take to Crystal's other 4 children. And just real quick, I'll never understand dipshits like this who get with people who have kids and then not accept them. Like, no, I don't care who you are. I don't care. You go for someone and live a life with them and stuff. And they have, you know, children already. That's part of your life now, brah. Like, you don't get to pick and choose. Like, sorry, you accept the person and their children, right? And Sherry said, so she gave some examples of how Brooks didn't really accept Crystal's children. So, like, for example, when they would go grocery shopping, right? Brooks would, you know, consciously and maliciously buy food for him, Crystal, and Eli. But he told Crystal that it was her responsibility to buy food for her other 4 children. Yeah, real gentleman, right? Big shock that he wanted to be a cop. Yeah, already don't like this guy. Already, I think he's a douche canoe and a twat waffle. Like, nah, dude, you accept someone and their kids. You don't get to just accept them. Yeah, when I saw the interview where Sherry was explaining it, like, that really got under my skin. And I'm a child-free person, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, no. No. Not okay, not cool. And it actually seemed that Brooks was sort of like an asshole in general. So remember how I said just a few minutes ago that he would like come to Crystal's family's home, the Ballards, and like talk for hours on end and, you know, just like chat them up? Well, apparently when it came to Crystal's friends and acquaintances, that was not the attitude Brooks displayed. I almost said Bricks. Brooks displayed. Beth Downs was a close friend of Crystal, known her for quite some time, known her for many, many years, like definitely knew her way longer than Brooks had known Crystal, you know? And she said when you would see Brooks and Crystal out and about, you know, just around town doing errands, whatever, you were not able to really stop and talk to Crystal like you used to. Crystal, you know, was very friendly, especially, you know, when you see your friend out and about, hey man, what's up, you know? Apparently, Brooks was not like this, and he always had this, like, annoyed, petulant child look on his face whenever a friend or acquaintance would, you know, hey, Crystal, what's up, and want to chat with her. According to Beth, yeah, Brooks was a petulant little child whenever this happened, when they were out. Are y'all sensing any red flags yet? Beth said that one time, you know, she saw Crystal and Brooks at a restaurant, and, you know, Crystal came over to say hi, of course. Brooks didn't, though. He stayed at the table for a second, and then he just physically got up and walked out of the restaurant. And as Beth and Crystal were catching up in a few minutes, Brooks then came back into the restaurant and gave Crystal the look. That's how Beth described it. And basically it meant like, yeah, shut up, let's go. I'm done. I want to go. In fact, Beth noted that after Crystal and Brooks got together, she didn't really see her friend as much as usual, didn't really communicate with her as much. She explained another time where she was at a church function. Crystal had just had baby Eli, and Beth said that Crystal, you know, let her hold the baby, and when she looked over at Brooks, he had this, like, pissed off, like, very appalled and offended look on his ugly face, as if he was appalled that someone else would touch his baby. That's how Beth said, like, this is how she felt when she saw his look and that whole interaction. That's how she felt. Now, it might be worth mentioning, like, this was just, you know, Beth's summation of what she observed with Crystal and Brooks. However, all of Crystal's friends and acquaintances said the exact same thing as Beth, that, yeah, Crystal wasn't really as communicative or out and about as she was before she got with Brooks. And yeah, he was just generally sort of an unsociable prick. So let's get to the date that we will be talking about quite a bit. Friday, July 3rd, 2015. Now, we don't exactly know all of Crystal's movements that day. We really don't. At least the public doesn't. But we do know, based on some surveillance footage, that during the day, Crystal did make a trip to Walmart. Some articles said it was with her children. Other articles said it was with cousins. On the surveillance video, she is with like 3 young children. So I don't know if maybe second cousins or something like that, or her own children. Unclear. But we do know that she visited Walmart, and she left Walmart approximately like around 5 or so. And according to neighbors' eyewitness testimony, they saw Crystal unloading groceries at her home around 5:15 p.m. or so. Now, it is said that Crystal and Brooks had a special date night planned for that Friday. They were going to go over to the Brooks family farm, the Houck farm. It was owned by Brooks' mother, Rosemary. It spanned about 245 acres or so, and it was on Pascal Ballard Road. Now, after this, all right, the neighbor's eyewitness testimony and the plans that Crystal had with Brooks, her whereabouts and movement are completely unknown. We do know that Crystal was reportedly last seen in the company of Brooks, their child Eli, on the Brooks family farm that Friday evening. Now, according to Brooks, the last time he saw Crystal was that Friday evening after they'd gotten home. He immediately went to bed, but Crystal was up on the couch playing a game on her phone. And supposedly, that is the last time Brooks ever saw Crystal. And this was around midnight, 12:15, 12:20, somewhere around there. Now, Brooks said when he woke up the following morning, July 4th, Eli was in bed with him, but Crystal was not. Crystal was nowhere to be found, and her car also was not in the driveway. Now, one of Crystal's daughters, Kylie, had been trying to get a hold of her mother that previous day on Friday, July 3rd, but had been unable to reach her like all that day. This was very unusual because Crystal was in constant contact with her children. Kylie said, quote, "I was calling and texting and she wasn't answering. Nobody could get a hold of her." Kylie then contacted her grandmother, Crystal's mother, Sherry, and asked, like, "Hey, have you talked to my mom? Like, have you talked to her? I can't get a hold of her." And so Sherry was like, "No, but let me shoot her a text." So, Sherry texted Crystal like, "Hey, one of your daughters is looking for you. Kylie's looking for you. You might want to, give her a ring." But Crystal never texted her mother back. And later that evening, that Friday evening, July 3rd, Kylie texted Sherry again and asked, like, "Hey, were you able to get through to my mom?" Sherry hadn't. Quote, "When I called her, it went straight to voicemail. Just nothing." Sherry herself had last seen her daughter that Wednesday, July 1st, when she had dropped off one of her granddaughters, but she hadn't physically seen her since then. So when Kylie had contacted Sherry again later that Friday evening and, like, "Hey, did you ever get through to my mom?" Like, I had never heard back. Sherry immediately knew something was wrong. She immediately grew suspicious. She was like, "This is unheard of. This is virtually unheard of. Crystal is always in contact with her children. She never has gone like a full day without contacting anyone. No, something's up." And Sherry immediately started calling around to Crystal's friends and family and acquaintances. I couldn't find any reports. If Brooks was one of the people that Sherry called or contacted, I would imagine it is. Maybe he just never got back to her. Unclear. The articles would just state that Sherry then started calling around all of Crystal's friends and acquaintances to see if anyone had seen her. Even Crystal's sister Brooke was immediately suspicious. She herself hadn't heard from her sister in a couple days, which was very unusual. So when all of Crystal's family and friends couldn't get a hold of her on that Friday, July 3rd, and couldn't get a hold of her the following day, that Saturday, July 4th, the next day, on Sunday, July 5th, Tommy, Crystal's father, and Sherry decided, you know what? It's time to file a missing persons report at the police station. Like, this is not right. Now, on her way to the police station, Sherry said that she happened to see Brooks. He was in his car, and so she, stopped to talk to him. And, so he rolled his window down, and she was like, "Hey, have you seen Crystal? No one can get a hold of her." And Brooks just responded with no, and "I don't know," and like, "Yeah, I hadn't seen her. I don't know anything." He denied having a fight with Crystal when Sherry asked him, like, "Hey, did you guys fight?" And she took off. He was like, "No, we didn't have a fight." And Sherry really grew concerned when, as she was talking with Brooks, she noticed in the back seat there was baby Eli. And she was like, wait a minute. Eli is about, I believe, 2-ish, 2.5, somewhere like that. And Sherry was like, wait a minute. In all of the time that Eli has been born, from the minute he was born, it was Crystal who was always out and about with baby Eli. You never saw Brooks out and about alone with his baby. That was very odd to Sherry, and it immediately made her, the hair on her neck stand up on end. She's like, wait a minute. Crystal would not be anywhere without her baby, man. Like, Crystal was, I said earlier she was like a chill mom, but she's still protective, especially of her baby. And all of Crystal's family and friends were like, no, you don't understand. You never saw her without baby Eli. She would never, ever leave her baby that young. That's just not the type of mother she was. So yeah, that was all suspicious. She continued talking to Brooks. Brooks just told her that, yeah, he'd woken up that Sunday as well, and he couldn't find Crystal either. She was nowhere to be found. And after speaking with Brooks, Sherry then reported her daughter missing around 3 p.m. And she said, quote, I remember later on them telling me it could be a year before we find answers. And I was just shocked. I was just like, there's no way I'm waiting a year to find my daughter. Now, as the Ballards were at the sheriff's department, like actively filing the missing persons report on Crystal, Crystal's ex-husband's son called them and was like, hey, I think I may have spotted Crystal's car. And it was then that Crystal's 2007 maroon Chevy Impala was found. It was found near mile marker 14 on the westbound side along the Bluegrass Parkway, the BG. So the Ballards got to the car, first. And when they got there, they noticed a tire was flat. You could actually see like black marks on the road that led directly to where the car had been pulled over on the parkway. Crystal's keys were in the ignition, and her purse, cell phone, and diaper bag were all in the vehicle, which was unlocked. There were no outward signs of a struggle, like no scuffed dirt marks, scuff marks, broken glass, blood, nothing like that. It simply looked like Crystal had pulled over her car and simply walked away. But what immediately struck Tommy about the whole scene, there were a few things that kind of immediately stuck out to him and made him raise an eyebrow. The first was the tire. So the tire was not blown out. You know how that stereotypical you're driving, all of a sudden your tire goes out? It wasn't flat like that. It was flat like it had lost air, like how someone can unscrew like the cap on the tire. So it was like that flat, but it wasn't so flat. It was on the rim. It was just, you could tell by visibly looking at it like, oh, that's a tire that's very, very low. You should, go pump that up. And why this was odd to Tommy and all of Crystal's family, frankly, was because they knew Crystal, all right? And they knew that she would never have pulled over on the parkway with a tire like that. Crystal's family knew that Crystal had driven on flat tires before, like, she had a history of doing it. Tires that were flatter than the one that they were currently seeing. And Casey, her brother, even recalled an incident where one time she had driven on the flat tire like so badly that it damaged the rim. And the reason she did this was because if she had a flat tire, if she was not in a safe area to pull over or anything like that, she would keep driving until she found a safe location to pull over. You can see video and pictures of the parkway. It's a pretty busy 4-lane highway with your typical like grass island in the middle to separate the two lanes. And it's a busy thoroughfare. And, Casey and Tommy were both like, no, Crystal would not have pulled over on the parkway. That's how she got the damaged rim last time, was she was on the parkway and didn't want to pull over. So immediately, as they get out of their cars and see Crystal's Impala, they're like, this is weird. This tire isn't even that flat, and she wouldn't have pulled over on the parkway. Another thing that immediately stuck out to the family was the position of the driver's seat. So Crystal had a pretty odd way of driving. So she would, put the seat as close as possible so she could reach the pedals, and then she would put the back of the seat all the way back. And that was so she could drive, she would stick up her left leg up on the seat and then drive with her right leg, very odd driving position, right? So you would remember that, especially if it was your family, right? But what was odd to them is when they were looking at Crystal's car here with the flat tire, they noticed the driver's seat position was all the way back and the back of it was pushed all the way up. That was immediately odd. They're like, no, Crystal would never drive like this. And I know a lot of the family, including Casey and Tommy, immediately were like, I don't think Crystal was in this vehicle when it pulled over. That is what they believed wholeheartedly based on what I just described. So, since they found the vehicle on the BG near the mile marker, of course, that's where the search for Crystal started, right? Makes sense. But though law enforcement, was searching, they weren't the ones really spearheading the searches for Crystal. That was Tommy, her father. You guys, we'll get into it. He never ever gave up looking for his daughter. He spearheaded all the searches. We'll get into it. He spent so much money trying to find his daughter. Now, Brooks was questioned at one point. He would be questioned several times throughout the course of this investigation. Of course, right? He's the boyfriend / common law husband, last known person to see her. It makes sense that he would be interviewed and probably interviewed multiple times, right? Well, apparently one of the times that Brooks was interviewed by police, I'm unclear of the exact date, but I know during one interview, when they were asking Brooks about like where Crystal could have gone, Brooks claimed that Crystal had gone out that Friday night with friends and had just disappeared. Quote, they do these fantasy parties. All these girls get together. It's not uncommon for them to stay out the better part of the night, if not the whole night. And the detective that was questioning Brooks this time then pulled out the records that the police had gotten of Brooks' cell phone activity. And the detective pointed out a text that Brooks had sent a friend that same Friday. This friend had invited Brooks and Crystal to some sort of like event or whatever, and Brooks had declined. And in the text to the friend declining, he stated what his and Crystal's plans were for that evening. The text read, quote, we've got a sitter for the evening. It's our first time being kid-free for a while, so we don't want to. We're kid-free. We're gonna enjoy ourselves. And when, the detective confronted him with this seemingly glaring discrepancy in Brooks', story here, he just shook his head and was like, I don't know. I don't know where Crystal went. I just don't know. On Monday, July 6th, the police and Crystal's family held a press conference. They were begging, of course, for any information that led to Crystal's whereabouts, to her safe return. After the press conference, Crystal's family, I think, spoke with a few more reporters, and they already, guys, were stating their suspicions about Brooks. Sherry straight up said that she didn't trust him. She repeated the story that she had seen him the Sunday that she reported Crystal missing. She repeated to the press, what she had asked Brooks. Hey, did you and Crystal, quote, get in a fight? And he told her no. And so she said, quote, I told him I'm going to the police department to report her missing. And he said, that's what you should do. She would not have got up and left and disappeared and not called anybody. That's not her. She would not have left her baby at home. And she also noted how, when Brooks said that, oh yeah, you should go to the police department and report her missing, she was just really shocked and appalled at Brooks' nonchalant attitude. She was talking about some everyday thing. Oh yeah, you should totally go report your daughter that I'm, dating and have a child with. Yeah, you should totally go report her missing. Yeah, already Brooks is super suspicious to me. I know if I had gone missing, I know Jeff would not, just be like, oh yeah, I guess we should go report her missing. He would be in full-blown panic mode as well. So, I don't know about y'all, but when Sherry was describing this, I was like, that's not suspicious at all, right? Crystal's sister Brooke also spoke about how she was kind of suspicious of Brooks. Quote, the stories just don't add up. You just don't go to bed one night and not know she's gone and then not worry when she left the baby. He has not offered once to search or help or do anything for the family. That's right. You heard her right. Brooks had not once gone out to search for Crystal. His common-law wife, the mother of his child, not once had he gone out to search, guys. The family also revealed at this time that they were offering a $40,000 reward with any information that led to Crystal's whereabouts. And this was according to the family spokesman, Tom Roby, who was a Bardstown Police Department officer, whose wife, Barbara, was actually Crystal's aunt. I mean, that's the thing with these small town guys, is I've lived in small towns a majority of my life. Everyone knows everyone. There's always a connection, So you can understand, you'll get to understand as we get further into the community response to Crystal's case. It's pretty amazing. Officer Roby thanked everyone in the community for their support, helping search, and just begged the public to come forward with just anything they knew. Quote, also, if Crystal can hear our voice, please let us know where you're at. Contact us. Tommy, meanwhile, was fiercely looking for his daughter. As we said earlier, he was really spearheading the search. He'd even formed Team Crystal, which was a bunch of Bardstown locals who were dedicated to finding Crystal, and they searched any and all areas. By Tuesday, July 7th, authorities and Crystal's family were still looking for any trace or sign of her. Law enforcement had used bloodhounds and a helicopter to even search the fields and the wooded area that surrounded the parkway where her car was found. A lot of thick wooded area in this area, guys. Honestly, when I was looking at all the pictures and then the documentaries on Crystal's case, Bardstown is really pretty, really green, but that also means there's a lot of thick wooded areas and brush and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, they had search dogs out, they were using helicopters, doing everything they could to see if they could find something. Several agencies had joined the search already, including the Bardstown Police Department, the Kentucky State Police, the KSP, and the Greater Hardin County Narcotics Task Force had also joined in the case and helped the Bardstown Police Department search for Crystal at this point. And as we'll get into, lots of law enforcement agencies will be involved. Sheriff Ed Mattingly said that same day at a press conference, quote, "We're just about to the point we've checked everything we can check unless something comes in." He told the press that the police had already received anywhere from 50 to 100 phone calls in relation to Crystal's case. There were, as there is in a lot of these cases, a lot of false sightings and false leads that were reported that end up going nowhere. Mattingly countered what the Ballards had said at their press conference the previous day about Brooks, and Mattingly was definitely trying to do some damage control there. He stated that Brooks had been cooperative. Quote, "I want everyone to know he has been completely cooperative with this investigation and has tried to assist us in any way that he can." He also stated that he didn't know if anyone involved in the investigation had seen Brooks or knew about his whereabouts the Sunday before Sherry reported Crystal missing. He also noted Keith, Crystal's estranged husband, had also been cooperative with the investigation. He said it seemed like the Ballard family were doing their own investigation and clearly did not like Brooks. Quote, "We don't have a reason to suspect him any more than anybody else. The family thinks he did it, but we don't have any proof." Mattingly pointed out that Crystal did not have a restraining order or any history of domestic violence with Brooks or Keith. He said that Brooks had offered to come to the press conference the previous day on Monday, but Mattingly told him not to. He said he didn't want him there because, quote, "I did not want to have any controversy here in this office. A lot of times when you get into personal relationships, one side of the family might not like the other side of the family, and as police officers, we have to work with everyone, and the only way to ever arrive at the truth is being respectful and non-accusatory. We do not have a suspect." I know, again, just with everything that I know about this case, I will tell you, it can definitely be frustrating hearing, the police talk like that, but at the same time, I kind of get it. This is the early days of the investigation. These are police officers, authorities, and what they say to the press has, real consequences, It's one thing for a family of someone missing or someone else to kind of say stuff, on camera or whatever. It's not too big of a deal, but, with police, they got to be a little bit careful a little bit. So I kind of understood where Mattingly was coming from here, especially in the very, very first days of this investigation. Mattingly also said that the KSP and Bardstown Police Department had taken custody of Crystal's vehicle and were, quote, "processing the vehicle at an undisclosed location." He once again implored the public to come forth with any type of information or knowledge that they had. Quote, "Somebody saw something somewhere that will get us going in the right direction." Assistant Chief Kevin Grayson with the Nelson County Fire Department had been among those who had helped search for Crystal, and he updated the press on, the searches thus far, and it wasn't, a very optimistic update. He said, quote, "There was not really anything that any group that I was with that we found that would be good for the case or whatever, but we didn't find anything other than normal stuff that should be there." Of course, referencing, right, to all the wooded areas and stuff like that. And everyone was just coming up with nothing. So, as we've alluded to and talked about just a few moments ago, Brooks was interviewed by police. And he was interviewed multiple times, and his first interview was actually in the days after Crystal went missing on July 8th. And on this day, Brooks had actually voluntarily come down to the police department to give an interview and a written statement. So in this interview that ended up being 2 hours long, Brooks was interviewed by Detective John Snow with the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. And he kind of just went point by point with Brooks over his written statement, all right? Trying to figure out what was the last steps Crystal took on that day that she was last seen, July 3rd. Brooks said that he and Crystal had left home for the family farm around 7 p.m. that day. The farm's about 10 to 15 miles away, so it wasn't a far drive or anything. Brooks said he didn't know if anyone else was at the family farm besides his mother, because as soon as they got there, him, Crystal, and Eli went straight to feed the livestock. Snow then asked Brooks about a burn pile that some search dogs had hit on as they were conducting searches for Crystal. I believe at this point, when Brooks is being interviewed on the 8th, I believe they were also searching the Brooks family farm, because that was the last known location Crystal was known to have been. So, Detective Snow asked him, "Hey, did you burn anything on Friday night?" And that's when Brooks remembered, "Oh, you know what? I did light a fire that night. It was a trash fire." Quote, "Yes, it's not uncommon. I don't want stuff piling up to the moon. I always light a fire." He said they went on a walk around the farm, but he couldn't remember if that walk was before or after he had lit the fire. He said that they all left the farm around midnight. They got home at approximately 12:20, midnight, and that is when he went straight to bed. He said when he got home, they went straight to bed, and he saw Crystal last on the couch playing a game on her phone. He said he awoke the next morning, the 4th, around 6 or 7 a.m. Eli was in bed with him. Crystal was gone. He said he did try calling her, though. Quote, I didn't know what to think, but yes, I called her. I called her that morning. He reiterated to Detective Snow that Crystal always took off when they were fighting, even though he had made no mention of a fight that he had with Crystal that previous evening. And he said when Crystal and him were fighting, she would often go to her cousin Sabrina's house, or even her sister's, or even her parents', and she would stay there sometimes until she cooled off. He said that Saturday, July 4th, when he woke up and, she was nowhere to be found, he got himself ready and Eli, and the two of them went back out to his mommy's farm, but he couldn't tell Detective Snow how long he had been on the farm because, it was Saturday, and Saturdays, he just liked to kick back and take it easy. I don't know what that has to do with the amount of time you spent on your family's farm, but whatever. He said he eventually went to another family member's home where the Houck family was having some sort of family, gathering or whatever, and he couldn't tell Detective Snow how many times he had called Crystal, or even what time he had called her. He said that if he tried to blow her up on her phone when they were fighting, that just made her angrier. So he didn't really try to get in contact with her too many times that Saturday. He said he couldn't give Detective Snow precise details on when he left the family gathering or what him and Eli did afterwards, and he couldn't remember what he had done the next day on Sunday. Now, at some point in the interview, Detective Snow implied that, Brooks was like the main person of interest in this case at this point. He pointed out, there's just no woman that's going to leave her phone and purse, in her car in broad daylight. That's not going to happen. He also pointed out that when they brought bloodhounds out to search the vehicle and the area near where the vehicle was found, Detective Snow noted to Brooks that it was odd that the bloodhounds couldn't pick up Crystal's scent at all, as if she had never been in the car. And it is at this moment, when Detective Snow is starting to kind of tell Brooks, we're looking at you, and there's all this suspicious stuff, that is when Brooks becomes emotional. So you all can watch the video. Up until this point, Brooks is very laid back and nonchalant. I don't know what I did. Very nonchalant. If I was in an interview room and, Jeff was missing and I hadn't seen him for 2 days, I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be all, it's like he was barely, attentive in the conversation, guys. It was wild. But as soon as Detective Snow started implying and insinuating that Brooks was a main person of interest and there's some stuff that doesn't add up, that is when Brooks all of a sudden became very emotional. He began to get agitated, started fake crying. I don't know, man. Maybe he was really crying, but the video that I saw, in my personal opinion, how, I viewed it, it certainly seemed like some bad fake crying, and Brooks is not a good actor. It wasn't very well done. Again, that's just what I observed and what I felt watching the video. He said he was primarily focused on raising Eli and focusing on trying to bring Crystal home safe. Quote, it's taking a lot of energy and effort. I can't even go on the side of the road without looking like a murderer. This is starting to get silly. I don't need an attorney. I'm innocent. This, to me, is starting to get silly. I haven't asked for an attorney, but this is really starting to get silly. And he kept railing on how he, quote, didn't know anything. So, as this interview is heating up, right, and Snow is starting to tell Brooks that, you're looking kind of sus here, that is when Brooks' cell phone rang. So who was calling Brooks in the middle of this interview? It was Nick Houck, Brooks' older brother, who just so happened to be a police officer in the Bardstown Police Department. Now, what was weird, right, is the phone call itself is already kind of weird. It's kind of weird. And the first thing that Brooks said into the cell phone is, quote, I know you didn't know I was here. That was the first thing. And so that kind of raised some eyebrows. And Nick had called to advise his brother not to talk to investigators. He said that they might try to trip him up and that, he should take steps to protect himself. This is Brooks' brother, who is a police officer, y'all. Brooks just told him, and you can see it on the video, quote, I'm innocent. I haven't done anything wrong. However, immediately after Brooks got off the phone with Nick, the interview ended. And additionally, about 2 hours after this interview ended, Brooks and Nick were caught on camera driving to the family farm. And that's about all the information I have about that little adventure they had, was that, 2 hours after this interview, after Brooks was basically told he was a main person of interest, and his brother, the cop, telling his brother not to cooperate with the police. Yeah, Nick and Brooks then went out to the family farm, and there was like surveillance footage. You know, everyone has cameras now. So they were caught going to the farm, and to this day, it is not known like what that trip was for. After a week had passed, guys, there was still no sign of Crystal, what could have happened to her. No evidence, no clues were found at all. The farm belonging to Brooks' family, you know, the farm that Crystal was supposedly last known to have been, was searched on July 10th. And by this time, on the 10th, the search for Crystal had extended beyond the parkway where her car had been found. Tommy, her father, said, quote, "We've got people in Bloomfield. We're getting ready to expand to the other side of Boston and down the river. The river's got up today on us and got swift from all the rain. But we won't leave until it gets dark on us." Not only did the search parties have to contend with, horrible rainy weather, there was also, at one point, a tornado warning. But Tommy was the only one who didn't seek cover. Quote, "I was in the woods when it come through. I stayed out. Other volunteers had sought shelter underneath a nearby bridge, and then they resumed the search after the tornado warning was lifted." By this time, Crystal's story had been picked up by national media, and her story was featured on major national programs like Good Morning America and Nancy Grace. But I get, of course, why the Ballards would, do any and all interviews, because they really just wanted to find Crystal. They wanted to spread the word as far and wide as they could that their daughter was missing, and they desperately wanted to find her. Tommy said that he was grateful that Nancy Grace had them on her show, though. Quote, "I think it's great she contacted me. All this exposure, the more the better. There are a few questions I'd like answered, but she did a great job, and I think she's still going to help us. We are grateful for everybody that's helping us. We've received a lot of support. This community has been good to us. We're taking every lead we get, checking every road that leads to the BG." Yeah, man, like I said, Tommy was really the driving force in searching for Crystal, paying for search parties and all kinds of stuff. And one of the reasons, not only is this, his daughter, but another reason Tommy was so hell-bent on finding his daughter was that, dudes, get this, his sister from decades earlier had been murdered. Yeah, so let's get a little bit into Tommy's sister's case. So on January 29th, 1979, 19-year-old Frida Shireen Sherry Ballard Barnes disappeared from Bardstown after taking her car in for repair. On top of that, she was 7.5 months pregnant when she disappeared. She had recently moved back home because she had separated from her husband, Edsel Eddie David Barnes. A week later, Frida's car was found submerged in the Ohio River with no sign or trace of Frida. Frida's remains and those of her fetus wouldn't be found until March 30th, 1982, and they were found on her estranged husband Eddie's property. The remains had been buried twice before being burnt to ashes. Police had located the remains after Eddie's accomplice, George Weir, made a deal. He had gotten caught for some other crime, not sure what, but in order to, cop a deal, he decided to let authorities know what he knew about the disappearance of Frida. George told police that Eddie had arranged for him to kill his estranged wife. Eddie was angry that Frida was divorcing him, and he didn't think he'd be able to afford the alimony and child support payments, and he was just very angry. So he thought it'd be cheaper, just to kill his estranged wife and his baby. So Eddie picked up George on that night, January 29th, 1979, gave George the gun, and according to George, he hit Frida over the head with a wrench before fatally shooting her. Now, at first, George told police that Eddie participated in the actual murder, but he would later recant this and say it was just him himself who had committed the actual murder. He said all Eddie did was, plan and arrange the whole thing, give him the gun, and drive the car. Now, initially, both George and Eddie were charged with the death of Frida and her fetus. However, the murder charge for the fetus had been dropped when in 1983, the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that a fetus could not be constituted as a murder victim. George ended up pleading guilty to murder and kidnapping in June of 1984, while Eddie decided to take his case to trial. So after the remains had been discovered on his property, Eddie was of course arrested and placed behind bars awaiting his trial. But get this, as he was behind bars, bars, waiting for his trial. In May of 1983, Eddie participated in a prison breakout along with 6 other inmates. And yeah, they escaped for a while. When he was eventually caught, he was sentenced to 15 years, not just for the prison escape, but for burglary, theft, and armed robbery. So yeah, he definitely had a busy time as he was on the run. And yeah, again, guys, this is as he was awaiting his murder trial. Yeah, lovely guy, right? Eddie's trial finally began, and it lasted only 4 days and was held outside of Nelson County because of the publicity around the case. Began on September 6th, 1984. Commonwealth's attorney Richard Barlow prosecuted Eddie, who was defended by John Tim McCall. George was, of course, the prosecution's star witness, and it was when George was on the stand that he admitted that Eddie did not participate in the physical killing of Frida. That's where he revealed this information. Now, Barlow was seeking the death penalty for Eddie since he kind of did like a murder for profit thing, and after 3.5 hours of deliberations, the jury found Eddie guilty of murder, but they recommended a life sentence for Eddie rather than the death penalty. Hardin County Circuit Judge William Cooper took the jury's recommendation and sentenced Eddie to life in prison on September 18th. At that hearing, McCall was trying to get Eddie's 15-year prison escape sentence and life sentences served concurrently, and McCall claimed that the KSP had told Eddie in an interview post-escape that if he cooperated with them and helped them find the other escaped convicts, they would see to it that Eddie's sentences ran concurrently, or he would only be sentenced to a year for his prison escape and other activities. However, the state produced KSP trooper Bruce Slack, who pushed back on this assertion. Slack said that they only agreed to tell the court that Eddie had been cooperative with them, and they were only going to do that if Eddie provided them with, information that they didn't know. He said, quote, "He gave us a statement, but we were unable to use any of it. He never gave us any information other than what we already had known." Judge Cooper ultimately ruled that Eddie's sentences would be served consecutively, citing a state law that said a sentence for prison escape as you were awaiting trial for another charge must be served consecutively. Judge Cooper declared that Eddie would not begin serving his life sentence until after his 15-year sentence had been served. And interestingly enough, after his sentence was handed down, McCall immediately asked the judge to excuse him from Eddie's case. He didn't want anything to do with Eddie's case anymore. McCall said he had discussed with Eddie, quote, "Why I don't feel comfortable appealing this case. He's not sure now he even wants his case appealed." Eddie agreed with this, and Judge Cooper released McCall from Eddie's case. After Eddie had been convicted, McCall told the press, quote, "They've rendered what I feel is a fair judgment in this case. I don't have any quarrel with the jury verdict." Yeah, so I wonder if McCall, didn't want to defend Eddie at all. I just thought that was super, super interesting. And, interestingly enough, Frida's case was a major factor in Kentucky passing a state law making fetal homicide a crime. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. So yeah, that is why Tommy was so dead set on trying to find his daughter. He had already had tragedy in his life, guys. He said, quote, "We're not giving up. Nothing is going to stop me from trying to get answers." By this time, the reward for any information leading to Crystal's whereabouts had been upped to $71,000 thanks to donations. Andy Carey owned a local business, Carey Sign Company, and he made and distributed lots of signs to go up all around town that had Crystal's name and information and asking for information, and he plastered them all around town free of charge. And by this time, remember we were talking about Crystal's story had reached national headlines and news and stuff. And remember how we talked about how the Ballards had gone on Nancy Grace? Well, Brooks went on Nancy Grace as well. He maintained his innocence. On the show, they talked about the fact that Brooks had taken a polygraph at this point, but the results had been inconclusive. He said, quote, "They just ruled it inconclusive, and that's exactly the way it stands." And that's all he said about that. He said he was innocent and had nothing to do with Crystal's disappearance. Claimed he had been honest and forthright with authorities. And when Nancy Grace asked Brooks, hey, why weren't you the one who reported your, girlfriend/common law wife missing? Brooks maintained that it wasn't all that unusual for Crystal to take off when they were fighting, especially because the relationship was, quote, stressed at times, and it wasn't unusual for her to take off from, anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. She had done this before. He said she would usually stay at her cousin Sabrina's house. He said that she'd stay away for a day, or, quote, a day and a half at the most. "I was not in the least little bit alarmed in any way, shape, or form," referring to when he had woken up that Sunday and Crystal was still nowhere to be found. And I thought this was interesting. Now, Now, Sabrina herself had something to say about Brooke's assertions that Crystal would come to her house all the time, especially when they were fighting, and she had some stuff to say about that. She said that in the almost 3 years that Crystal and Brooks had been together, Crystal had come to her house exactly twice while they were fighting. One time, Crystal was only at Sabrina's for an hour, and another time, she was only there for like 2 hours. She had never stayed the night and had never stayed away for like this 24 to 48 hour period that Brooks was talking about. Sabrina said that she was pretty shocked and like surprised when she was watching the interview and Brooks like brought her name up and said that. She was totally blown away. She was like, that's simply not true though. Sabrina also said that she was surprised because she hadn't even heard from Brooks. Like she hardly heard from him ever, but she had last heard from him on July 5th. She had woken up at around 10 a.m. and saw that she had a missed text from Brooks that was dated at 9:31 a.m. He was asking her, "Oh, hey, how are you doing? Have you seen Crystal?" Now, this really threw Sabrina because she had never texted with Brooks before. I'm not even sure if she was aware Brooks had her number. So yeah, she told him no, hadn't seen her. And she said when she got a text from her aunt that same day around 12:30 asking the same thing, "Have you seen Crystal?" That is when Sabrina called Brooks back. As soon as he answered, the first thing out of Sabrina's mouth was, "Where is Crystal and what is going on?" She demanded to know the last time that he had seen her, and Brooks repeated his same story, how he had woken up that Saturday, July 4th, and Crystal was nowhere to be found. Sabrina was immediately raising an eyebrow. She's like, wait a minute. You knew, like, you hadn't seen her since that Friday night. It is now Sunday the 5th, and, like, you're, like, cool and nonchalant. You're not worried or anything. Like, she thought that was just very strange. And so Sabrina was like, okay, well, whatever. Like, aren't you a little bit worried? She has Eli. And Brooks was like, no. I have Eli here with me. And Sabrina would later say that at this moment right here, when Brooks said that he had Eli, she immediately got a pit in her stomach. She began tearing up because she was like, oh my God, something's happened to Crystal. She wouldn't have left her baby. Everyone who's ever known Crystal maintains that. She would not have left her 2-year-old child. Going back to Brooks' interview on Nancy Grace, he defended himself when Nancy Grace started accusing him of not being involved enough in the search for Crystal. We already mentioned this. Not once did he go out with any of the search parties, with any of Crystal's family, with any of the police to search for her. He just said, quote, "All of my efforts in searching for her have been done behind the scenes with the Nelson County Sheriff's Office." He said it was very important for him to clear his name. Quote, "I have not responded to a lot of the negativity because I want the emphasis to remain on Crystal's safe return home. I wanted to stay focused in that area rather than dealing with any of the animosity." And Brooks would maintain his innocence, not just with Nancy Grace, but he went around the media round, specifically like the local media, and maintained his innocence. He said in an interview with PLG TV 13, local news channel, quote, "I am 100% cooperating with police and willing to assist them. I'm 100% innocent and willing to go to any lengths I have to prove that." 1 month after Crystal's disappearance, still no clues, evidence, or trace of her. The search was still ongoing for her, and at this point in time, it had extended beyond Nelson County into Marion County. On August 3rd, a team from the Louisville Fire and Rescue Team was spotted at Marion County Sportsman Lake, and they, were obviously searching, and the media was speculating that it could have something to do with Crystal's case. The team had been spotted, like, riding around in a boat and, like, using sonar equipment over the lake, clearly, trying to search for something. A group of people watched them. Some of them wore, like, shirts supporting Crystal, like, pray for Crystal's safe return and stuff like that. And this actually wasn't the first lake or body of water that had been searched for Crystal. Beach Fork River and Melody Lake had already been searched by police. It was reported that police had taken a piece of evidence from Melody Lake, which, by the way, was very, very near the Houck family farm, but they had never and have never divulged to the public what that evidence was, which we will get into is a very common theme in this case. Most of the evidence and stuff that police have done, guys, is largely unknown to the public, and we'll get into it. Sherry did say that whenever cadaver dogs were brought to Melody Lake, that they would hit, and we'll talk a little bit more about Melody Lake a little bit later on, actually in the next video. And as I mentioned before, police did not divulge what evidence they took from Marion Lake, and at this point in the investigation, they were very tight-lipped in general. They didn't tell the press or the public what they were doing at Sportsman Lake in Marion County. They were very tight-lipped. Marion County Sheriff Jimmy Clements only told the press that he was present during the fire and rescue team's search of the lake because, from his understanding, he was there as part of a follow-up from an earlier canine search that I guess, had hit on something. He said, quote, "They brought the dive team in to check it out. So whatever the dogs hit on, that's why the fire and rescue team were there, I guess, searching the lake." And that's really all the public knows. That's all that's been publicly reported. By the end of August, still no sign or trace of Crystal. The search parties started to dwindle in number as the 2-month mark approached on her disappearance. And in fact, earlier that month, on August 7th, authorities had actually announced that they did not plan on themselves conducting any more search parties for her, at least until more evidence or leads came to their attention. But that didn't stop Tommy from looking for his daughter. He still organized, small search parties, even searched himself. He said, quote, "Right now, it's probably 4 or 5 of us with the dogs. That's all we need right now with what we're doing. There's a lot of people. If we need them, all we have to do is call them." The Ballards had not only had, help searching for Crystal with law enforcement agencies and volunteers around town, but search groups and out-of-state search groups even came to assist. One of these groups was Bring Them Home, and they're a search and rescue group based out of Florida. And this group is comprised of search volunteers, most of which have some sort of law enforcement and or military background. They work about 15 to 20 cases a year all around Florida, but Bardstown, Kentucky was the farthest that they had ever gone to help and aid in a search. Group volunteer Tammy Fincy said that they were drawn to Bardstown because the Ballards needed help. I think they saw the news reports, and if you've seen the interviews with Tommy and Sherry, they're just, I don't know, man, like every time I saw them, I just wanted to give them a hug, you just wanted to give them a hug. So they said, yeah, they were drawn by the fact they needed help. The group had first arrived on July 15th and stayed 2 weeks, but then they had to leave. Tammy said, quote, "We can't live here. We have lives, but we'll keep coming back." They had actually come back in the 3rd week of August. Tammy said, quote, "We came back for another 2 weeks to help out. We're here to help for no other reason, than to bring closure to the Ballards." Tammy also said how this search for Crystal was different than the other cases Bring Them Home had been involved with. The group mainly dealt with law enforcement, which makes sense if a bunch of their volunteers are former law enforcement. They probably still have contacts and stuff. But the search for Crystal, it was the first one that they had done where they were with the family. Tammy said, quote, "Law enforcement is all we work with. This is the first time we've worked with just the family." And she said since their searches are volunteer on this case, they have a little bit more latitude and freedom about where they search and stuff like that. She said, quote, "Right now, it's a needle in a haystack. And we have to find the haystack before we can even find the needle." And she said even though their group had a pretty good success rate, this case in particular was very frustrating for them. Just because of the lack of any clues, guys, any evidence whatsoever. You have hundreds of people out there combing, law enforcement agencies, search groups, volunteers. Nothing had been found, guys. Can you believe that? Not a trace. No clues, no nothing. Not only was there no sign of Crystal, the strain between the Ballards, particularly Tommy and Sherry, had really grown with Brooks. On August 19th, the Ballards had actually gone to court to try and force Brooks to let them see their grandson, Eli. Yeah, they hadn't seen Eli since Crystal had disappeared. They told the court they would, of course, never put their grandson in harm's way, and they wouldn't speak ill of Brooks or, the Houck family in Eli's presence. Remember their earlier comments where they, put all the suspicions on Brooks? So they were trying to, tell the court, we just want to see our grandson, man. We won't talk smack about his dad. We won't say anything like that. We just want to see our grandson. They said even before their daughter's disappearance, it was mainly Crystal who would, come and visit the baby, which, big shock. I mean, the guy doesn't sound like that great of a father. Who has a 2.5-year-old son and you've never once been out and about by yourself with him, right? Remember when Sherry had run into Brooks when she was going to report Crystal missing? I don't know, must not be that great of a dad if seeing him out and about with his son on his own is noteworthy, But that's not fair. You don't know, right? I just thought that was really odd. The Ballards said that they had been in regular contact with their other 4 grandchildren, which they would eventually get custody of. I was a little confused if by this point, August 19th, if they had custody of Crystal's other children. But they were definitely in regular contact with her other children. But Eli was the only one that not only they hadn't seen, but his siblings hadn't seen him either. Crystal's other children hadn't been able to see their half-brother. And the Ballards were saying, yeah, Brooks was the one not allowing Eli to, see them. I guess they had attempted to set up like some public meetings, not just so that they could see Eli, but with like his other siblings, with Crystal's other children. And Brooks would just not make these meetings. The reporting wasn't too clear or specific, so I don't know if he would say, yeah, let's meet up, and then just flake, or what, or shut it down from the beginning. I'm not sure. All the reports said that after one public meetup had fallen through, so I don't know if this is after a series of no-shows and flakes or what, but after, this one specific public meeting fell through, that is when the Ballards decided to go to court and see if they couldn't force Brooks to let them see their grandson. Brooks did not comment to the press about the proceedings. He didn't comment at all. He showed up to the courthouse with his mommy, wouldn't answer reporters' questions when they asked him, like, why won't you let the Ballards see Eli? Like, how come? And he just refused to comment, refused to say anything. Before the hearing started, which ultimately would be delayed until September, Sherry said that she would ideally like 50-50 visitation. So apparently at this court hearing that was held, there was a group of supporters that showed up to the court proceedings. They were definitely in support of the Ballards. They were wearing like Crystal shirts, like pray to bring Crystal safe and stuff like that. But the court made all the supporters turn their shirts inside out or hide them for fear of, like, perceived hostility. I thought that was just super interesting to note. Now, in the end, the Ballards did get some visitation. They were allowed to see Eli every other weekend, but Brooks did attempt to appeal this decision, and he was stating that he didn't think Eli seeing Tom and Sherry was in the best interest of his son. And this was because of the hostilities between the Ballards and the Houcks. Which, look, man, like, if Brooks hadn't already displayed such weird, questionable behavior, particularly the nonchalant, like, don't give an F attitude about the mother of his son disappearing, I would say, like, yeah, I guess I don't really blame him. You've got the Ballards, like, talking smack. Like, I get why he wouldn't want a son, but, like, if that was it, I would understand. But, like, this is on top of all of the other questionable, I think we can say at the very least, behavior that Brooks had exhibited so far. You know what I mean? On September 3rd, a prayer vigil was held for Crystal and the Ballards. Sherry and Tommy thanked everyone in the community for their, continuing efforts, their continuing support. Sherry said, quote, "It's really difficult when you get home or when you're doing your day-to-day stuff and things are not normal. It's very hard when you come home and you still have no answers. When you have that community out there backing you up, it's not easier, but it helps a lot. We will do everything we can so she's not forgotten." And Tommy added, quote, "I feel like if I give up, they're going to give up," in reference to like people helping to search for Crystal. And it is during the same month of September that Brooks' older brother Nick was suspended from his job from the police department. And oh boy, y'all, some interesting stuff we're about to get into right here. So at first, Nick was suspended with pay, and then he was suspended without pay, which apparently is something only the mayor can do. So let's get all into it. Now, when this first happened, all right, when the news of Nick's suspension was reported to the press, no details were given at all right? No specific details. People speculated that it might have something to do with Crystal's disappearance. That's what people were thinking, right? Wouldn't you? But there was a local station, Wave TV, and they submitted a open records request, specifically in regards to Nick's suspension. But when the local news station got the open records request, it showed that, oh, you know what? It's not in relation to Crystal's disappearance. Looks like Nick here had a history of not following protocol, being late to work very often, and using his police cruiser for personal business. However, this comes out, right? So this comes out, and people are like, oh, okay, I guess it has nothing to do with Crystal's disappearance. He's just kind of a shitty, privileged cop. Shocker. But get this. By the next month, October, more details were revealed, and oh, y'all. So, get this, all right? So Wave TV got this open records request when Nick was suspended in September, and people were like, okay, cool, he was just kind of not a very good cop, and that's why he was suspended. So it's reported he's suspended, and then there was really nothing else really reported on about that, right? That is until October 18th. On October 18th, the press reported that Nick had been fired from the Bardstown Police Department. Yeah, so first he was suspended, now he's fired, and the reason he was fired, and frankly suspended in the first place, had nothing to do with that open records request that the local news station had gotten. Nick was fired for interfering in Crystal's investigation. So according to the order made by Mayor John Royalty that fired Nick interfered when he called his brother in the middle of that interrogation. Mayor Royalty said that Nick knew that his brother was going to be questioned by Detective Snow and decreed that that call to Brooks in the middle of his interview was enough to warrant interference in the investigation. The mayor said that Nick had put his brother's interests above those of the public and that right there was enough to fire him. So let's go back to that interview that Brooks had. Remember on July 8th? So the next day on July 9th, Detective Snow had actually called up Nick and asked Nick to come in for some questioning. Nick straight out refused. Yeah, just refused and was like, no, I'm not coming in. Nick was then ordered by his direct superior officer to submit to questioning. Nick was then in a 2-hour interview a week after his brother's interview on July 15th. Now, one of the detectives interviewing Nick, I wasn't sure if Detective Snow was in on this interrogation, but the detectives that were interrogating Nick then questioned him about that trip that him and his brother had taken after Brooks' interview on July 8th. Remember, they were caught on camera going to the Houck family farm? Well, detectives wanted to know, what'd you all do? Why'd you go out to the farm there so quickly after Brooks' interview? You know, they wanted to know what was up. Want to know what Nick's response was? Quote, man, if I knew, I'd tell you. I wish I could give you a detailed statement. Detectives also questioned Nick about some eyewitness testimony that they had received. It had actually come from Nick's neighbors. Nick's neighbors had told police that in the immediate days following Crystal's disappearance, they saw Nick go into his police cruiser, retrieve something from it, they couldn't see what it was, and put it into his mother's car. And it's probably based on what those neighbors told them. Nick's police cruiser had been searched and processed by police. It had even been searched by a search dog, and then they sent all of the evidence they collected from his cruiser to the KSP crime lab. And supposedly, the crime lab may have found some potential evidence. During the interrogation, the detectives told Nick about this evidence that the crime lab had found in Nick's police cruiser. They said, quote, there's a couple spots in your trunk, and that blanket lit up like Chernobyl. Why would that be? And this was in reference to some supposed blood spatter that had been found in Nick's police cruiser's trunk, along with a blanket. Though, remember, I just quoted them. The detective said nothing about blood. They just said spots. And Nick maintained that there would be no blood in his trunk. And the investigator, pointed out, I never said anything about blood. But, quote, okay, bodily fluids then. To which Nick just replied, quote, I don't have a clue. He maintained that he never helped anyone move a body or store a dead body in his police cruiser or anything like that. Claimed that he never helped and would never help destroy evidence. And that he and his brother were innocent. Quote, there's no way he could do something like that. He's not capable of it. It was also revealed during Nick's firing, so all this stuff was coming out, right? It was also revealed during this time that Nick had taken and failed a polygraph test on July 24th that had been conducted by the FBI. Apparently, Nick had been trying to put this polygraph session off for as long as he could until he finally couldn't. They pretty much forced him to come in and take it. And they interviewed Nick after they had conducted the polygraph and done the examination of it. They said he displayed a troubling tendency to say that he couldn't remember certain details, ranging from significant, important details to simple, mundane, easy ones that he should have been able to recall. He couldn't recall details about his own police cruiser and just kept, I don't know. That was pretty much his whole thing. The examiner noted that the questions Nick had the biggest problems with were the questions pertaining to Crystal. Specifically, The two questions that I guess Nick really bombed hard on the test were, quote, do you know where Crystal is right now? And are you hiding information about what happened to Crystal? Yeah, apparently when they went to like examine his test, like that really, I guess, like flew up on their radar that he definitely was not saying everything that he knew. Now, Nick was not happy at all that he was pretty much being accused of, being a liar. Like, he was not happy at all. There's video of it. He got very aggressive and agitated with like the interviewer who was like kind of telling him like, you didn't really pass these questions. Why couldn't you answer these questions? And Nick was just very upset. And then finally, like the interviewer was like, why are you getting all agitated and yelling at me? Like, you need to calm down. And Nick just yelled, quote, I don't give a goddamn what your fucking computer said. I'm telling you that I've been 100% honest with you. You're calling me a fucking liar, and I don't like it when people call me a liar. Yeah, in the video, man, he gets very, very agitated. So after Nick failed his polygraph, there was a hearing held on October 15th, and that was where the decision to fire Nick had happened. At a press conference the very next day, on October 16th, Sheriff Mattingly said for the first time publicly to the press that he would indeed consider Brooks Houck a suspect in Crystal's disappearance while announcing Nick's firing. Mattingly also stated publicly for the first time law enforcement's belief that Crystal was presumed dead at this point. Quote, I would label Brooks Houck a suspect. I think it's safe to say that she is deceased, and you can do that because people have certain ways that they do business. They have to have food. They have to have income. They have to have shelter. They have to have family. Crystal Rogers was extremely close with her family. She has had no contact with her family. Tommy said of this development when all this broke, and all this was coming out, Tommy said of everything, quote, I hope she's alive, but I always thought she was gone. Since they named him a suspect, I feel like they're working now, which I always thought the sheriff's department was doing a good job, but it makes me feel a lot better. Mike Ballard, Crystal's uncle and Tommy's brother, said, quote, as far as relief goes and closure, I don't think you're going to get closure until Crystal is found and, whoever is responsible for her disappearance is brought to justice. Sheriff Mattingly also noted in this press conference that Nick, quote, has knowledge of what has happened, but refused to elaborate further. Like I said, there is a lot of pertinent information that has not been released to the public. On January 6th, 2016, the Ballards were trying to file court motions to prevent Brooks from leaving the state with Eli. The report was very vague, and it was a very short little clip, but it just said something about I guess Brooks was selling off a bunch of land and property and stuff, and Tommy and Sherry thought this meant that he was getting ready to flee the state, so they wanted to go to court and force Brooks legally not to be able to leave the state with Eli. And at this point, I know that the Ballards did have custody of Crystal's other 4 children. At least that's what the article said. I'm not sure about the children she had with Keith. It just said that they had custody of all 4 of her other children. Brooks' lawyer assured the court that his client was not fleeing the state and wasn't going to leave with Eli. And Sherry, outside of the courthouse, told the press about some interactions she had with Brooks since, everything had happened. She said her most recent encounter with Brooks had happened in the parking lot of the local Lowe's. She said, quote, I specifically told him that day that I think you did something to my daughter. I made that very clear from that day. When I did see him that day, he looked at me and told me, I have more respect for you in the last 15 minutes than I've ever had. That blew me away. I'm like, I just sat and told you I think you did something to my daughter and you have respect for me? I didn't understand that. What a weird thing. As we'll get into, I think he's just a smarmy dick weasel, honestly. I think that's where that is. We'll get into it probably mostly in the next video, part 2, but he's just smarmy. And what do you expect, dude? He comes from a privileged family in a small town. They're considered almost like royalty, he's never had to answer for anything, so I'm not really surprised at his nonchalant, don't give an F, whatever schmarmy attitude, personally, just from the research and videos I've seen of him. And then, get this, guys, get this. On January 7th, the next day, a man named Danny Lee Singleton pleaded not guilty at the Nelson County Justice Center after he had been indicted on 38 counts of perjury. He had been indicted in December, and these perjury counts were in relation to Crystal's case, specifically related to some sort of grand jury hearing or something that was held in September. And Danny apparently testified at this grand jury hearing or whatever it was, and had evidently lied. So he was, arrested and indicted in December, and now, January 7th, he was pleading not guilty to these charges. Yeah, wild, right? I tried finding more information about this, jury that was held about her case in September. Dudes, I couldn't find anything, and I tried really hard, so maybe I'm just an idiot and I'm not very good at research or something, but if you can find that information, I would love to hear it, because I personally couldn't find any information about this. I'm going through the articles, right? And I usually will start with newspapers.com, and I filter it so it shows the dates in order. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, in January of 2016, Danny Lee Singleton, and you're like, who the hell is this guy? What? I don't understand. So I don't know, maybe there's some reports out there that I just couldn't find. I don't know, but it was very weird. The indictment for Danny stated that 38 times Danny made, quote, material false statement which he did not believe. And this, of course, while he was under oath testifying before that jury. The Nelson County Sheriff's Office also noted at this time to the public that these perjury charges against Danny was in relation to Crystal's case. Danny's bail was set at $200,000 after he was labeled a flight risk, and his trial was then set for April. And you're probably wondering, who the hell is this Danny Lee Singleton guy? The only information that has been released about Danny is that he is a close friend and longtime employee of Brooks Houck. At this time, Tommy hoped that Danny would be the key to finding his daughter. Quote, my daughter, Crystal, went and picked him up when Brooks wouldn't go and get him after work, and took him home and took him places. You'd think he'd have a heart for Crystal. During Danny's arraignment on these charges, of course, many of Crystal's supporters and the Ballards showed up. But get this. So on January 7th, they announced these charges and Danny officially pleads not guilty, right? But then on January 21st, police announced the arrest of 2 additional men, Vincent Nethery and Donald Howard. Police said that these 2 men were arrested in connection to Crystal's case. So what the hell, right? What's going on? Apparently, these 2 men were charged with reporting a false incident. The men admitted that they lied to investigators when they implicated Danny in the investigation. And that's all I could find about those guys. Yeah, so apparently it's because of these 2 guys that I guess Danny was wrapped up in all this. And yeah, they were arrested and admitted, oh yeah, what we told investigators about Danny being involved or whatever we told them was totally fake. Yeah, so weird. In July of 2016, Danny ended up pleading guilty to the lesser charges of false swearing, and he was immediately released from custody after being behind bars for 6 months. And that's the end of those guys. I have not come across those guys' names again in the investigation thus far. Really weird, right? There's so much weird stuff going, and I get it, but it's because, we don't have that information. The police are keeping so much information about this case close to the chest, which again, I totally, get and understand, but it still makes you wonder, what the F is going on? Now, I'm unclear exactly when, all right? But after this whole thing with Danny, the Ballards decided to hire their own private investigator. Now, apparently, this investigator, through interviewing witnesses and, doing investigator stuff, learned that on the night of July 3rd, several of these witnesses had spotted a white Buick parked in a, quote, peculiar location near a farm owned by Houck's mother. So when the investigator and the Ballards learned this information, they posted it to Facebook, hoping anyone would be able to give them, some more information, hey, this is what we've been told. Do you guys know anything? So they posted to Facebook, seeing if they could get any, leads or tips from this. Which apparently it did. And it garnered so many, tips and legitimate leads that law enforcement got involved. And they eventually found out that a woman named Anna Whitesides owned a 16-year-old white Buick at the time of Crystal's disappearance. Oh, did I mention that Anna is Brooke's grandmother? So when investigators found this out, they went to Anna to serve a search warrant on her. They had gotten a search warrant to seize her vehicle and process it, collect it for evidence, all that good stuff. Well, when they came to Anna's door, she said, gee golly gosh, I don't have the car anymore. I had sold it. She said she had sold it to a dealership in Louisville. Now, it should be noted, Anna did give the investigators all that information. They were able to track her Buick and take it in for processing. Authorities then questioned Anna the week of May 9th, 2016. And of course, they were talking to her about her vehicle, right? And then on May 15th, Anna was served a subpoena. It was a grand jury subpoena that stated she had to come in on the 18th and testify before a grand jury. At this point, prosecutors believed that her Buick may have been used to cover up Crystal's murder. And there was a court order that had been signed by Nelson County Circuit Judge Charles Sim. And in that order, it stated, quote, "From the court's vantage, it appears the Commonwealth may very well believe all of the following. 1, that Whiteside's motor vehicle was used to dispose of a body. 2, that her motor vehicle was subsequently cleaned. And 3, that her motor vehicle was sold in an attempt to prevent the Commonwealth from obtaining any evidence from it." In response to the subpoena, Anna then hired an attorney, Jason Floyd, who worked for a local Bardstown firm, Fulton Hubbard and Hubbard. Floyd advised Anna to invoke the Fifth Amendment in order to avoid incriminating herself. He maintained that if Anna were to testify, she could risk being, quote, "ensnared by ambiguous circumstances" if prosecutors were to contend that she had any knowledge of the vehicle being involved in Crystal's disappearance, and that she had disposed of it, the vehicle. He said, quote, "She gave 2 full statements to the police. She was the one who showed them where to get the car that was in question. As an 82-year-old woman who has health and memory issues, we felt it was best she did not testify for the risk of incriminating herself with something she might say. It's very clear that the Fifth Amendment is not safe harbor for the guilty. It's a haven for the innocent." Floyd then drafted a motion of his own that was hand-delivered to prosecutors on May 18th, the day they wanted Anna to testify. And this motion was an attempt to overturn the subpoena that they had given Anna. So that same day on the 18th, Judge Sims ordered that, okay, so we have this motion from Floyd. The prosecution, you now have 7 days to file your own motion in response. He also ordered for Anna to appear in court on June 1st. Commonwealth's attorney, Terry Gogan, or maybe it's Gagan. Gogan was the most common pronunciation I could find, so I hope it's that. He filed his own motion on May 25th that contended that Anna was not a suspect. He did not intend on asking her questions which may incriminate herself. He stated he was only seeking information about who may have had access to her vehicle on/around that July 3rd. On May 31st, the day before she was to appear in court, Judge Sims ruled that Anna did not have to show up the next day and brought up Anna's potential for self-incrimination. Floyd, in his court filings, had claimed that police had accused Anna of lying, and Judge Sims, was pointing to this and pointing to the fact that Danny had been caught on perjury. Remember, his case hadn't settled yet. And so he was just kind of pointing that out. It's just she does have, some ground here for the self-incrimination. Look at this Danny Singleton guy, And the next day, Judge Sims assigned a hearing date in which they would hear arguments over Anna's motion to squash that grand jury subpoena, which was slated for June 15th, but would eventually be pushed back due to Gogan's request. I'm not sure why he wanted it delayed, if he needed more time. I think there was one article that said something about, he wanted to, reconsider the questions he was going to ask her or something like that. I think he was taking into account, her fear for self-incrimination and something like that. I couldn't find what date they rescheduled this hearing, but when it was held, Anna showed up, of course, with Floyd, didn't speak to the press or say anything, but Floyd, her attorney, spoke to the press, and he said, quote, "I certainly think Anna Whitesides, who is 82 years old and failing health and cooperated with authorities, twice submitted to interrogation voluntarily. She even showed them where to get the car, then was called a liar and served with a grand jury subpoena. So certainly Anna Whitesides, we submit, has been unfairly treated." At this time, the Ballards thought that Anna, possibly all of the Houck family, knew something about Crystal's disappearance. They were frustrated with, the stall tactics that Anna and her attorneys were taking. Sherry told the press, quote, "I think she knows something. Why would she want to plead the Fifth? I'm sorry, but I'm not taking up for her. She might be old, but she's old enough to know better." And Tommy added, quote, "I can see her protecting her grandson. It's not right, but maybe she'll have a heart when she comes back and do the right thing." On July 3rd, 2016, on the 1-year anniversary of Crystal's disappearance, there was a vigil/prayer service/memorial held at the St. Thomas Church in Bardstown. Many wore pink, brought pink balloons and stuff in honor of Crystal's favorite color. Mary Taylor actually organize this event. She would actually end up becoming a close family friend, and every memorial/vigil service that would ever be held in Crystal's memory and honor would be organized by Mary. She said, quote, "The community support has been more than amazing. I don't think they ever planned or thought this would be this type of magnitude, because hundreds of people showed up, guys. This case really hit Bardstown. They already had unsolved cases, you know what I mean? High profile unsolved cases at this point. And yeah, all throughout Bardstown, there are just hundreds of signs, and they range from, information about Crystal and have you seen her to, vocal support of the Ballards. We support the Ballards, bring Crystal home and stuff like that. This case really shook the community. Meanwhile, on July 20th, Anna and Floyd showed back up to court, and behind closed doors, we don't know any details, they were given the questions that prosecutors wanted Anna to answer. Apparently, Floyd raised some objections and they kind of went back and forth, but we don't really know what happened with this hearing, guys. And let me tell you. So they were in court for 35 minutes, and before he dismissed court for the day, Judge Sims ruled that, get this, all future proceedings concerning Anna would be sealed from the public and kept confidential. Yeah, so we don't know anything about Anna's possible involvement. We have no clue at all. This is the last bit of information we have in regards to Anna in this investigation. Judge Sims told the public, quote, "We did get the questions today, and we've got a date where we're going to try and move this forward. So that's all I can tell you at this time." And that's all he said. So yeah, we have no idea. We do know that when the Ballards came out of the courthouse this day and everything was said and done, they were not happy at all. They looked visibly frustrated and upset. Sherry just told the press, quote, "I don't feel like I got anywhere today, honestly. I want more. I just want more. I want her to answer those questions today. Not a month from now, 2 months from now. I want it today." And Tommy added, quote, "We want to know who drove the car, and she knows, and that's why she isn't telling." Then, on August 11th, 2016, Anna's house was served with a search warrant. And right after a search warrant was served on her house, one was served on Nick's. Detective Snow had actually personally served the search warrant to Nick himself, who, signed off on it and went back inside. He was at his grandma's house when the search warrants were served to them. His pickup truck was in the driveway, and police said that he offered no resistance or anything like that when they executed their search warrant and searched him and his grandmother's homes. Now, there's not a lot known about these search warrants. Remember, I said they're keeping a lot of this stuff close to the chest. But Detective Snow did tell the press that the search warrant had been served at Nick's home, that though his truck was in the driveway, he, quote, would not assume it was the pickup truck that was to be searched. And yeah, apparently there was a vehicle that was going to be searched. Snow declined to tell the press what officials were looking for, what they were doing with these search warrants, what was happening. They didn't say nothing. And mere moments after Snow's little interview with the press where he didn't really say anything, Sheriff Mattingly sent out a statement to the press, one of those generic statement that goes out to all the public. And it stated that his office had received numerous calls from media about the search warrants, and that as of this moment, they would not be giving any more public interviews in relation to those warrants. The brief statement just read, quote, "On August 11th, 2016, Deputy Jonathan Snow served a search warrant on Nicholas Houck as part of the ongoing investigation into the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. Deputy Snow continues to investigate the case as he has since she went missing in July of 2015. Now, as these search warrants were being executed, of course, the Ballards were pretty ecstatic. They were happy that things seemed to be moving along. Sherry said, quote, "I feel better than I did. I'm just praying this is a step closer to answers for us. I would bet my life he's guilty. That's how sure I am he's guilty. I'm ready, but I'm not ready. I'm ready to get closure, so maybe we can just deal with everything." And of course, she was talking about Brooks being guilty. Honestly, all the Houcks. Tommy added, quote, "I'm like her," referring to Sherry. "I hate when that day comes, but I want to find out what they did to my daughter." And even though no one knew anything about any details about these search warrants, Tommy did say to the press that at least one of the warrants, the one for Anna's Buick, was related to supposedly DNA that was found on/in it. By August 15th, the press found out that at least part of the search warrant that had been served on Nick was for a search of his person for DNA. Yeah. Goguen confirmed this, saying, quote, I would confirm that's a part of it, collecting DNA from Nick. But interestingly enough, Goguen denied an earlier report that 2 other search warrants had been served at Anna's home. Even though we know that they did search the warrants, but he was trying to say that that was false. WHAS-TV, local news station in Louisville, had actually quoted Goguen in their report of this, but when he was then questioned, about this, he denied that and just said, quote, I'm not sure where they got that from. But he did add, quote, there's a possibility of others. So this whole thing was just so weird to me. Like, they were keeping these search warrants, like, so hush-hush. But this right here was weird to me with Goguen, because it was like, we already know search warrants were served on Anna's home. Like, people witnessed it. Like, we know it. I don't know why you're trying to deny that. Like, I get keeping certain stuff from the public, but this was just silly to me. Especially given that, like, the Ballards had talked a little bit about what they knew, and Floyd, Anna's attorney, also told the press a little bit about these search warrants. He said that Anna had given a cheek swab and hair samples, and said that the search warrant for her home allowed officials to look for vacuums, cleaning supplies that could be used to clean out a car, and documents related to the sale of Anna's Buick. Goguen refused to confirm any of this, and would only confirm that they had gotten DNA from Nick. That seemed to be the only thing he was willing to confirm. And get this. On August 31st, the Houck family farm, supposedly the last place where Crystal was seen, was searched yet again. However, get this. It wasn't just the local police searching it. The FBI, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and the Louisville Metro PD all swarmed the farm to search. As of this date right here, August 31st, 2016, it was the largest, most massive search of the Houck farm to date. Over the course of several days, they brought in dozens of investigators, 14 cadaver dogs, and they searched all of the land. They searched the ponds that were on the land. They were doing a very thorough search. This was actually the 3rd search warrant that had been served on the Houck family farm. However, this warrant right here did not allow authorities to search the house on the farm property, just the property itself. Detective Snow told the press, quote, I'm hopeful. I think we're moving in the right direction. It's been a long road, and it may be even longer, but I think we're getting close. And that will unfortunately conclude part 1 of this video. I know, I explained it all in the beginning, but yeah, there's a lot to get into this case. I am gonna warn you, next week, we're gonna be opening up with some very sad, heartbreaking news. If you know about this case, you know where I'm going with this. But just in case you haven't, no spoilers. But yeah, there's a lot to get into with this case, and as I've demonstrated in this video, there's so much, relevant, important information that we don't even know anything about. We don't really know these details about search warrants or anything. They are definitely keeping this investigation under wraps. And yeah, it's bizarre, man. We will finish up next week with this case. Until we meet again next week, take care of yourself out there, and honestly, yeah, keep the Ballards in your thoughts. Dude, this case really stuck with me, especially because it's still an active case. Guys, this case is unsolved. There's no answers yet. So I don't know. It's just, it's sad. It's very sad, very bizarre. All of the Bardstown cases really are just bizarre, honestly. Really bizarre. I definitely want to go into a deep dive into the other cases as well. That will definitely be in the future. Thank you again, Casey Gibbs, for pointing me in the direction of these cases. Man, what is going on in Bardstown? Is something in the water? What is going on? It just doesn't make sense for a small little quiet town to have so many, not just high-profile cases, unsolved high-profile cases, guys. None of them are solved. It's wild, man. It's wild. And next video, I'll end with my own little, not theories, but just kind of my thoughts on all these cases thus far. Alrighty. Well, remember, until we meet again next week, don't be a dick out there. Leave a little sparkle wherever you go. And I look forward to hanging out with you guys next Tuesday. Bye-bye.